The Battle of the Atlantic. (1939). The start of the war, provoked by Hitler's desires for expansion, meant that Plan Z, which made provisions for the construction of 250 U-boats, was shelved. At the start of the conflict, Dönitz found himself with fewer submarines than the Allies. He could count on only 56 operational submarines to control more than 1,000 ships, crossing the immense Atlantic Ocean to Britain and back. Our only chance to cut the enemy's commercial routes is by building more and more submarines, Admiral Ryder declared on the 3rd of September in Berlin, backing the request for an increase in the budget for the submarine war. On the same day, following the British declaration of war, all ships of the Kriegsmarine were ordered to be ready for combat. As a consequence, U-boat crews began to take their part in the conflict, with a series of actions which resulted in Hitler losing confidence in Dönitz. U-30, captained by Fritz Lemp, sunk by mistake the British transatlantic liner the Athenia, 200 miles off the Irish coast. (118) of her 1,200 passengers died. The survivors were rescued by British destroyers. 300 Americans were on board, which caused Hitler to immediately suspend actions against transatlantic shipping for fear of provoking the United States into entering the war. This event, which recalled what had happened to the Lusitania in the First World War, caused serious diplomatic tension and was the start of what Churchill would later call the Battle of the Atlantic. On the 14th of September, U-39, commanded by Lieutenant Glatz, fired its torpedoes against the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, which was patrolling to the northeast of Ireland. The premature explosion of the torpedoes saved the British vessel from being sunk and gave away the position of the U-39, which became the first German submarine to fall victim to Allied escort destroyers. Three days later, the Courageous was less fortunate and was sunk close to the Bristol Channel by U-29, under the command of Navy Lieutenant Otto Schuhart. Goebbels issued a Wehrmacht report on the incident to begin a campaign in favor of the Third Reich's Sea Wolves. U-29's exploit is quickly converted into a spectacular success of the submarine heroes for the whole of Germany. On the 13th of October, the Royal Oak is sunk in Scapa Flow by U-47, under the command of Günther Prien. These events make up for earlier failures and lead the Führer to recover his confidence in submarines as weapons of war. Meanwhile, alarm bells are ringing at the Admiralty. The attacks, added to the placing of magnetic mines, in some areas close to the British coast by Kriegsmarine patrols cause heated debates in the British government, which takes the decision to withdraw the aircraft carriers from security tasks and increase protective measures for the convoys. At the same time, part of the fleet is transferred to the south coast as a precaution against a possible German invasion. A few days before the start of the war, the pocket battleships Graf Spee and Deutschland, together with their auxiliary ships, the Altmark and the Westerwald, were in the South and North Atlantic, supposedly carrying out exercises. Strategically well situated, they receive orders from radar to attack any Allied ship they encounter. The Graf's field of action extends from Pernambuco to Cape Town. Its unfailing accuracy in attacks on ships sailing from Britain with supplies to the Empire converted it into one of the Royal Navy's greatest enemies. After its first victim, the Clement, in a few weeks it sinks 9 merchantmen, carrying more than 50,000 tons of goods. The Admiralty, alarmed, sends Force G, formed by the cruisers Exeter, Ajax, and Achilles, which set sail in search of the German battleship and don't return to port until they have destroyed it. The Spee's captain, von Langsdorff, anxious to continue his successes, goes looking for where the greatest amount of maritime traffic is to be found. He sets sail for the River Plate, where he intends to refuel and stock up on supplies in order to continue his attacks against the ships that are part of the commercial traffic coming from the American continent heading for Britain. The intelligence services inform the British command that the German ship has been spotted 250 miles northeast of Punta del Este. Three cruisers under the command of Commodore Hardwood sail at full speed in pursuit of the German battleship. On the 13th of December, they close in on it near the Uruguayan coast. A mistake by Langsdorff results in the Spee being outflanked by the swift British cruisers. The German battleship's fire is returned by the British ships, and the Battle of the River Plate begins. The Exeter is put out of action after suffering direct hits to its command post and one of the portholes. Before this, however, it had managed to hit the Spee, causing damage to the German ship's 6 280mm guns. Soon after, it is the Ajax which is hit, and Commodore Hardwood is forced to withdraw his ships out of range of the German guns. At 11 o'clock at night, the damages suffered by the Spee force it to find refuge in the port of Montevideo. Meanwhile, the British ships take up position in the estuary. The German captain tries to make use of the respite, calling for help from his country and requesting the Uruguayan authorities 15 days' grace to repair all the damage to his ship. However, international agreements and diplomatic pressure from the British government result in Germans receiving authorization to remain for only 72 hours. On the 17th of December, when its time has elapsed, the Graf Spee leaves the port of Montevideo. The captain, von Langsdorff, who knows the British cruisers are waiting for him in the estuary, rather than suffer the dishonor of being shipwrecked by enemy fire, orders the crew to abandon and sink the ship in the waters of the River Plate before the eyes of thousands of startled spectators. In Britain, the news has had a great impact. Proud of their feats, Churchill personally receives the crews of the 3 cruisers. It helps compensate for bitter memories of the Gallipoli defeat.
We ask no favors of the enemy. We seek from them no compassion.
However, the Admiralty is surprised to learn from the Navy's technicians that the German battleship had had affordable radar antenna on its bridge. (1940). The U-boat crews, formed by volunteers, see themselves as the lords of the sea, though it does not prevent many of them from suffering the psychological effects provoked by the tension involved in having to spend days confined in terribly cramped conditions, often subject to attack by depth charges. The inscrutable Karl Donitz is aware of the situation of his sailors and does little to improve it. What is important to him is to keep up the attacks and receive the recognition of the Fuhrer for his innovations in the submarine war. Besides creating the successful offensive plan against Scapa Flow together with Otto Oehern and giving the Nazi propaganda machine its first hero of the sea war, Gunther Prien, Donitz continues to demonstrate his strategic skills, introducing new tactics in underwater attacks. The most lethal of these is called the Wolf Pack, based on extending the search for enemy ships beyond the coasts of Britain. The enormous Atlantic is to be a huge field of operations, with the sole aim of attacking the highest possible number of convoys, which brave the wide and variable British navigation routes. The first submarine that sights a convoy must radio its position and course to the other U-boats in the area. A meeting point is then decided on, and once there, taking advantage of the darkness of night, the pack will attack and try to sink as many Allied ships as it can before rapidly abandoning the area with a view to avoiding falling victim to the escort ship's anti-submarine weapons. Putting the plan into action involved displacing the U-boats to different parts of the Atlantic, leaving the shipping in the English Channel to the Luftwaffe. In their attempt to set a mortal trap in the English Channel, the German planes come up against the strong opposition of the RAF fighters. On the 17th of September, in the middle of the Atlantic, U-48 sinks the liner City of Benares, which was carrying 408 passengers from Britain to Canada in search of a new life. More than 300 died, including 80 children. The survivors were rescued by the destroyer HMS Hurricane. Some days later, the convoy HX-72, composed of 41 ships loaded with supplies from Canada headed for Britain, is spotted by U-99 under the command of Otto Kretschmer. At nightfall, the German submarine gets in among the British merchantmen and launches its torpedoes, sinking 3 in the first attack. The escort ships drop their depth charges, which are dodged by the skillful maneuvers of Kretschmer's submarine. Quickly, 2 more submarines join battle, U-47, commanded by Gunther Prien, and U-100, captained by Joachim Schepp. By the end of the attack, the 3 U-boats had sunk 12 merchantmen, disappearing into the darkness without leaving a trace. On the 18th of October, the convoy SC-7 out of Nova Scotia, composed of 34 merchantmen, sails slowly towards Great Britain. The escort ships fail to notice the 5 German submarines tailing them in anticipation of nightfall. In a short time, the submarine's torpedoes cause chaos among the British ships, leaving only 13 of them to continue their journey undamaged. Their crews arrived in British ports horrified by what they have been through. Despite these losses, the Admiralty continues believing the best defense is the careful planning of its convoys, with greater protection from destroyers equipped with the latest technology. It has in its favor the immensity of the Atlantic and the continuous changes of routes, which makes Donit's task more difficult and leads him to request an increase in the number of submarines. According to his calculations, in order to win the battle, more than 400 are needed. However, the Führer sees things differently and does not agree with Donitz. He is disconcerted by the strength of British resistance both at sea and in the air. He has other plans. For some time now, he has been convinced that the best way of defeating Britain is by starting as soon as possible the campaign against the Soviets. On the 5th of November, the day Roosevelt is re-elected president, the Kriegsmarine's battleship Almirante Scheer, commanded by Captain Theodor Kranke, attacks a convoy formed by 37 British ships, escorted by the camouflaged Jervis Bay. The Scheer manages to sink the bay, and 5 other ships steaming away at full speed. The Admiralty momentarily suspends the convoys and sends the cruisers Dorsetshire, Neptune, Norfolk, and Pretoria, plus the aircraft carrier Hermes, to hunt down the enemy. The Scheer's 26 knots and her range of 20,000 miles, together with the bad weather, result in the British ships returning to port after a number of days' fruitless searching. (1941). In January, the British had lost 320,000 tons, and the Germans were convinced that if they increased the pressure, using all the available fleet, Britain would end up yielding. At the start of February, the German cruisers Admiral Hipper, Scharnhorst, and Gneisenau engage in a number of skirmishes in the North and South Atlantic, sinking more than 30 Allied ships. Despite this, on the 6th of March, in a speech to Parliament, Churchill says that Hitler has discovered that Britain cannot be defeated from the air, and in the following months, he will have the certainty that it cannot be beaten in the Battle of the Atlantic.
He set the whole fury of the Huns upon London.
On the 7th of March, U-47, commanded by Scapa Flow hero Gunther Prien, was sunk by depth charges from the corvettes Arbutus and Camellia, and the destroyer Wolverine, which pursued it for a number of hours thanks to the equipment on board. On the 16th of the same month, U-99, under the command of Otto Kretschmer, the greatest of the German submarine aces, with 44 sunken enemy ships to his name, took on a convoy using the tactic of one torpedo for one ship. Kretschmer sent 6 merchantmen to the depths, but as he attempted to get away in the darkness, he came up against the destroyer Walker. The U-boat's duty officer immediately ordered the vessel to dive, which enabled the British ship's sonar to detect it and drop a number of charges. The damage caused forced the submarine to surface. The whole crew was rescued and detained. The British officers were pleasantly surprised by the feared Kretschmer, who turned out to be a polite and cultured man, who addressed them in perfect English, saying, "I am tired and defeated. Please, may I sleep?"
Did not have the will to do.
Roosevelt, concerned about Britain's situation and the danger that a German victory in the war could represent, persuades Congress to approve the Lend-Lease Act. Build and rent. This is the American president's idea. The United States will bear the cost of the manufacture of ships and armaments of different types, which they will then rent to Britain. In this way, the British Prime Minister is able to guarantee the supply of arms and, up to a certain point, implicate the Americans in the conflict. In April, the first destroyers built under this system reached Britain. In the same month, the U.S. Congress declares the area up to parallel 26 its own zone of influence. The lack of conclusive results, both in the air and sea wars, provokes the first signs of disquiet from Hitler and his high command. The German leader wants to begin the invasion of the Soviet Union as soon as possible. In spite of these events, the dictator's egocentricity and arrogance had not changed. In the Reichstag, he announced, "Great Britain will realize that we are sleeping. We have started to renovate our submarine fleet, and their ships will suffer the consequences." The new Types 9 and 10 submarines, better equipped and with a greater range, are prepared for long-range operations. On some of these missions, they are supported by the surface ships such as the battleships Bismarck and Tirpitz. These modern and powerful ships are the pride of the Kriegsmarine. They are considered masterpieces of German engineering only superseded by the Yamato of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Bismarck, named after the architect of the German Empire, was built in the Hamburg shipyards. It is 53,000 tons, and its deck is 240 meters long, from stem to stern post. It is equipped with 8 380 millimeter and 12 150 millimeter guns. Between January and March of this year, under the command of ship's captain Ernst Lindemann, and with a crew of 2,100 men, it sank 22 merchantmen in the North Atlantic. It would appear out of nowhere like a ghost ship, speeding towards the enemy ships and sinking a number of them with its powerful guns, before steaming out to sea at 30 knots without leaving a trace. Seeing these successes, the German command begins to prepare Operation Runeberg with the aim of destroying a part of the Royal Navy. On the 18th of May, the Bismarck, the Prinz Eugen, which are to participate in it, leave their base in Gdynia near Danzig. On the 20th of May, the Kriegsmarine battleships rendezvous with the number of destroyers and the aircraft carrier Gotland off the coast of Norway. While awaiting orders from the Navy command, the Bismarck anchors off the coast of Bergen. The locals gathered to watch the majestic battleship. Among them was a member of the British Secret Service, who quickly informed the Admiralty of the position of the German ships. The distance they are at allows the RAF to send reconnaissance planes to examine the area. At 1:15, the Spitfires are able to photograph the German warships, and Admiral John Tovey, Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet, immediately decreed a state of alert and ordered the planes not to lose sight of the enemy. With the objective of hunting down the Bismarck, he makes the battleship King George center of operations, close to the Faroe Islands, and spreads out the British ships. The cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk patrol the Denmark Strait, while the Arethusa and the Birmingham focus on the area to the south of the island. The battleship Prince of Wales and the cruiser Hood also put to sea as reinforcements. At nightfall on the 23rd of May, the Suffolk and the Norfolk inform the command center that the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen have been detected on radar crossing the Denmark Strait, very close to the coast. The nearest ships are the Prince of Wales and the Hood, the British Navy's most prestigious ship, under the command of Vice Admiral Holland. The two ships head for the rendezvous point, where on the 24th, they sight the German ships. When they are at 15 miles, Holland orders the Hood to take up position and open fire on the Kriegsmarine's powerful battleship, which suffers a number of direct hits in its fuel tanks. The Bismarck, making use of its great maneuverability, responds with devastating artillery fire against the British ship, which is destroyed in only 15 minutes and rapidly goes down. Next, its gunners set their sights on the Prince of Wales, which withdraws at full steam under enemy fire, suffering 4 hits. Shortly afterwards, the Prinz Eugen and the Bismarck set course for the ports of northern France, for the latter to carry out repairs. The British government and people are shocked by the loss of the Hood and the shameful flight of the Prince of Wales. An angry Churchill shouted at the Admiralty commanders to sink the Bismarck. Admiral Sir Dudley Pound and his staff put into operation the largest deployment in the history of the Royal Navy in search of the feared German battleship. Reconnaissance planes and ships fitted with new radar systems trail the ship, which is leaking fuel as a result of damage inflicted by the Hood. They are joined by HMS King George, the Repulse, and the aircraft carrier Victorious, plus the flotilla under Admiral John Somerville, composed of the cruisers Renown and Sheffield, and the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, situated to the west of the Iberian Peninsula. Admiral Gunther Lütjens, the commandant of the Bismarck Group, orders a diversionary maneuver which enables the Germans to elude the Royal Navy ships, pursuing them and continue on course for the Saint-Nazaire. Losing sight of the enemy, the Admiralty decides to include in the operation all the escort ships in the area, which are to abandon the convoys and join the search for the German battleship. But the Kriegsmarine ships have set a different course, and the German Naval Command has suspended Operation Rheinübung. The Prinz Eugen is on course for the Azores, while the Bismarck is headed southwards. In the early hours of the 25th, the U.S. Coast Guard vessel Medic discovers the position of the German battleship and informs the Admiralty. Captain Bovell, in charge of the aircraft carrier Victorious, situated at a distance of 100 miles, orders his Swordfish torpedo bombers and Fulmars fighter planes to fly low and fire on the Bismarck. After a number of attacks, they only score 2 direct hits on the German ship's armor without causing any serious damage. Meanwhile, the situation of the German flagship has been communicated to the offices of the Kriegsmarine. Raeder and Dönitz order 6 U-boats to go to its aid. But once again, the skill of Captain Lindemann enables the Bismarck to escape its pursuers and disappear from the British ship's radar screens. However, Admiral Lütjens, who greatly admired British radar, believes they are still in the sights of the Allied ships, and addressing the crew on the occasion of his birthday, comments that the moment could come to choose between victory and death. Shortly afterwards, he orders a message to be sent, informing the German command of the situation of the ship. The British intercept the message, and at 4 in the morning on the 26th, a reconnaissance plane from the Ark Royal, which was fitted with radar, locates the German ship to the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula. On the same day, and in spite of the bad weather, Swordfish torpedo bombers from the British aircraft carrier carry out waves of attacks on the Bismarck, destroying its rudder mechanism. Lütjens and Lindemann send a message to the Führer. We are unable to maneuver. We will fight to the death. The desperate attempts to repair the damage cannot prevent the British ships Piorin, Zulu, Maori, Rodney, and King George V, among others, positioning themselves within firing range of the German battleship in the early hours of the 27th, and the exchange of fire begins. The incredible failures to coordinate efforts to help the Bismarck on the part of the Luftwaffe and the Kriegsmarine leave the ship and its crew to suffer a deluge of enemy fire for more than 2 hours. The unequal combat becomes a slaughter of officers and men, but the majestic German battleship refuses to go down. Admiral Tovey, surprised by the ship's capacity to resist, orders a ceasefire. He can see that the deck is destroyed and full of corpses, but despite the serious damage, the ship remains afloat. Deeply impressed, he is forced to admit that it is not possible to sink it with guns. Lütjens is dead, and Lindemann is not prepared to suffer the dishonor of being sent to the depths by the enemy ships. He orders the crew to sink the vessel and abandon ship. In a short time, the great battleship lists to port and begins to sink with its captain standing to salute in the bows. More than 2,000 sailors lost their lives, and only 87 could be rescued by the destroyer Maori and the battleship Dorsetshire, which abandoned hundreds of them to their fate, claiming it had detected a German submarine in the vicinity, something which was later disputed. By 11 o'clock in the morning of the 27th of May, the Bismarck was no longer a threat. At 7:30, U-74 arrived on the scene, but was only able to rescue 3 sailors who were in a life raft. On June 22nd, the invasion of the Soviet Union begins, and the U-Bootwaffe transfer 8 submarines to the Baltic to take on the Soviet fleet. At the start of September, a German submarine attacks the U.S. destroyer Greer. In October, it is the Reuben James that suffers the effects of the submarine war, with the loss of 100. These incidents and tension in the Pacific lead President Roosevelt to end his apparent neutrality and order the U.S. fleet to attack any German ship it encounters. It cannot be denied that from the start, the German strategists' ability to continually switch tactics and lay traps had turned the war at sea into an enormous challenge for the Allies. One of the great dangers faced by the British convoys was pirate ships, disguised merchantmen such as the Atlantic. This particular ship is fitted with torpedoes, big guns, and a seaplane that carries out reconnaissance to seek out victims. Sailing the Indian and Atlantic Oceans and continually changing its flag, it has been able to sink 22 Allied ships, always employing the same strategy. It detains the Allied merchantmen with deceptive signals, and once in firing range, the Atlantic's captain, Bernhard Rogge, orders cargo and crew to be transferred to his ship before sinking the enemy vessel. On the 22nd of November 1941, RAF reconnaissance planes following it locate the ship near Cape Town and communicate its position to the cruiser Devonshire under the command of R.D. Oliver. The British ship steams ahead at full speed in pursuit and surprises the German ship in the act of refueling U-126. It opens fire and scores 2 direct hits, putting it out of action. The captain orders the ship to be sunk. The Devonshire withdraws, fearing an attack from the German submarine, which is unable to hit the British ship with its torpedoes due to the distance, and returns to rescue the survivors from the Atlantic. On the 14th of December, the HG-76, comprised of 32 ships and escorted by the aircraft carrier Audacity and 8 destroyers, leaves Gibraltar, bound for Britain. For the first time, the Admiralty provides constant air cover for the Allied ships, intending to respond to enemy submarine and bomber attacks. A solitary U-boat discovers the convoy and communicates its course and speed to the units posted on the French coasts, which quickly head for the rendezvous point to form a wolf pack. Shortly afterwards, they begin successive attacks on the British ships, which last for a week. On the 21st, U-751 sinks the carrier Audacity 500 miles to the north of Cape Finisterre. Later, 2 merchantmen share the same fate. But the British escort ships and planes have been relatively successful, destroying 5 German submarines. (1942). During the first 3 months of the year, Allied ship losses doubled. Names such as Wolfgang Luth, Erich Topp, Heinrich Lehmann, and George Lassen compete to occupy first place in the ranking of U-boat commanders who have sunk the most ships. For some time, their range of action has increased, thanks to the new supply submarines put into service by the Kriegsmarine, called Milchkuh, milk cows. Their mission is to supply the U-boats that operate at long range, as in the case of those that take part in Operation Drumroll off the U.S. coast. Following the sinking of 2 merchantmen in the river mouth in the port of New York, Admiral Dönitz gloated, "Our submarines operate so close to the beaches that bathers can see how we sink their ships." However, investigations into a new type of sonar based on sound echoes would soon force him to change his tune. The Allied governments decide to increase protection for convoys during the whole time of the crossing, using small modern aircraft carriers called babies, which, together with renovated electronic equipment installed in the escort ships, result in a greater number of losses for the U-Bootswaffe. Also, planes flying continuously from strategically located bases patrol all the corners of the Atlantic and prevent U-boats from sailing on the surface for fear of being discovered. On the 12th of September, U-156, commanded by Lieutenant Werner Harnestein, spotted the British transatlantic Laconia, which was carrying more than 2,000 prisoners, including 1,800 Italian prisoners in the South Atlantic. The German submarine sends it to the depths, and though his instructions are to abandon the survivors, Hartenstein picks up hundreds of those who have been shipwrecked, who cram the submarine's interior and deck. He orders the Red Cross to be put on deck and launches an SOS to the ships in the vicinity, giving the coordinates of his position. Some hours later, a B-24 Liberator from the American base at Ascension, commanded by Lieutenant James Hardin, bombs the submarine, forcing it to dive, condemning all those on deck and those being towed in launches to a tragic death. (1943). At the start of the year, the Wolfpacks undertake a series of actions against Allied oil tankers in the Caribbean and the North Atlantic, sinking more than 20. Roosevelt and Churchill, meeting in Casablanca, order their high commands to make the elimination of the U-boats a priority. It is clear that the planned disembarkation on the coasts of northern France cannot go ahead until the Battle of the Atlantic is won. In February 1943, the balance of the sea war greatly favors the Allies. The great sailors of the Kriegsmarine have disappeared almost completely, and the new inexpert officers are fanatical Nazis who carry out kamikaze operations in their submarines and are easily trapped by the Allied ships' anti-submarine weapons. The British, with their revolutionary centimetric radar, capable of detecting a submarine at long range, are able to locate U-boats day and night and sink them. Things are not going well for Hitler. He relieves Radar of his command, accusing him of having an outdated vision of sea war, and names Karl Donitz as his replacement at the head of the Kriegsmarine. Both he and Armaments Minister Albert Speer give top priority to submarine building. The great efforts being made by the German armies on all fronts do not prevent new models of more sophisticated submarines being produced, though they are unable to halt the flow of the Atlantic convoys. By May, the pragmatic Donitz is conscious of the fact that they are losing the sea war and suspends submarine patrols in the North Atlantic. In a short time, 56 submarines have disappeared, and his son Peter was a crew member in one of them. The Allies' power and technological capacity have reduced to a minimum the effectiveness of the submarines of the Kriegsmarine, which, after D-Day, saw their field of action limited to the Baltic. Of the 1,170 submarines of the U-Bootwaffen, 864 were used in the Sea War, 785 being lost. The Allies suffered losses of 2,900 ships of every type and different nationalities. The human cost was 28,000 German sailors killed and more than 100,000 lives lost in Allied ships.